From the sidewalk on East 65th Street, two Roosevelt townhouses look like one residence. It is 1908. Pocket doors join rooms inside, and another door connects the upper floor. Sara Delano Roosevelt lives on one side. Her son, Franklin, and his wife, Eleanor, live on the other. The question is simple. Who actually controlled the Roosevelt family? This is Hitorium, where we follow the private relationships behind public power. This story begins with a house, but the house only makes sense once you know the two women inside it. Sara built the structure. Eleanor would spend years building something else. Sara Delano was born in Newburgh, New York, in 1854. She grew up in a large, wealthy Hudson River family with deep roots in the early Plymouth colony. Her father, Warren Delano Jr., made and rebuilt fortunes through the 19th century China trade. That trade included tea, silk, and opium. The Delanos lived well, but the money wasn't simply a fixed inheritance. Warren lost much of his fortune during an economic collapse and returned to Asia to rebuild it. For several years, the family lived in Hong Kong while that recovery was underway. Sara's childhood still offered protections that most Americans could never expect. Private tutors handled much of her education. Travel was common. Family connections reached across New York, New England, Europe, and the trading world beyond them. The household ran on rank, duty, and habit. Older relatives carried authority. Servants had defined roles. Money made distance from ordinary hardship possible, even when the family fortune itself changed. Perhaps wealth matters most inside families, when it turns preference into something everyone else must accommodate. Sara married James Roosevelt in 1880. She was 26. He was 52, a widower, with an adult son and an established estate at Hyde Park. Their marriage joined two old New York families, but it wasn't merely a merger of names. Sara's diaries describe a busy domestic life built around horses, reading, travel, relatives, and the Hudson River. James was older, often in poor health, and deeply attached to Springwood. 2 years later, their only child was born. Franklin Delano Roosevelt arrived on January 30th, 1882. The birth was difficult. Biographical accounts describe serious complications, and Sara was advised against another pregnancy. Franklin remained her only child. She documented his development closely. The surviving record contains notes on his health, lessons, activities, and the small changes that mark childhood. Sara also took on work that wealthy mothers often delegated. She read to him. She supervised his tutoring. She followed his social contacts. National Park Service accounts describe her bathing him herself when he was young. Franklin was educated mostly at home until he entered Groton at 14. James and Sara both watched his education closely. When Franklin later attended Harvard, Sara temporarily moved to Boston to remain near him. Franklin didn't always resist that closeness. He came for tea and dinner, brought friends, and sometimes stayed overnight. Sara sent food from Hyde Park. In one letter, she insisted she had no intention of tying him to her apron strings. Sara's own letter complicates the familiar picture. Sara wanted proximity. Franklin often accepted it. James Roosevelt died in December of 1900. Sara was 46. Franklin was 18 and in his first year at Harvard. Sara continued to manage Springwood and substantial family resources. She would remain the central household figure there for the rest of her life. Springwood looked across the Hudson toward the Catskills. Its rooms held family furniture, portraits, books, and the habits of several generations. Life there followed seasons more than clocks. The family moved between country estates, New York homes, summer places, and long visits. This was the world Franklin inherited. Sara knew how to run it. Eleanor Roosevelt's childhood offered a different lesson. Anna Eleanor Roosevelt was born in New York City in 1884. Her father, Elliot Roosevelt, was Theodore Roosevelt's younger brother. Her mother, Anna Hall Roosevelt, belonged to another prominent New York family. The family name suggested security. Eleanor's childhood did not provide much of it. Her mother died of diphtheria when Eleanor was 8. Her younger brother, Elliot Jr., died soon afterward. Her father, after years of alcoholism and declining health, died in 1894. Eleanor was not yet 10 when she lost both parents. She and her surviving brother went to live under the authority of their maternal grandmother, Mary Ludlow Hall. The household was respectable and disciplined. It was not the place where Eleanor later said she learned confidence. At 15, she was sent to Allenswood Academy outside London. The school's headmistress, Marie Silvestre, treated her differently from most adults in the Roosevelt family. Silvestre expected students to form opinions. She challenged assumptions and took Eleanor seriously as a thinking person. Eleanor traveled with her and learned to look beyond the social world she had known in New York. Years later, Eleanor wrote that whatever she became had its seeds in those years with Silvestre. When she returned to New York in 1902, she entered settlement work on the Lower East Side. She taught children at the Rivington Street Settlement House. She also saw working conditions far removed from the houses of her relatives. Settlement work required more than charitable visits. It placed reformers inside neighborhoods shaped by low wages, crowded housing, immigration, and long factory hours. Eleanor taught classes and spent time with families whose lives did not resemble the Roosevelt homes she knew. She also became interested in the conditions faced by women and children in industrial work. The contrast was not abstract anymore. It had addresses, rooms, wages, and crowded streets. This was still a young woman's early public work, not yet a political career. But it gave Eleanor experience outside the closed social world of her relatives. Eleanor had grown up inside privilege. She had also learned that family security could disappear quickly. At Allenswood, she found adults who valued independence rather than obedience. That doesn't explain everything that followed. It does help explain why Sara and Eleanor could look at the same household and see different needs. Sara valued order, while Eleanor increasingly valued room to act. History often turns family conflict into personality. Property and dependency usually mattered just as much. Their adult lives were about to meet again. In 1902, Eleanor and Franklin reconnected while traveling through the Hudson Valley. They were distant Roosevelt cousins, fifth cousins once removed. They had known each other within the wider family long before romance entered the story. Franklin was at Harvard. Eleanor had recently returned from England. Letters followed. The relationship became serious. By 1903, Franklin had proposed. Eleanor accepted. Sara asked them to keep the engagement secret for more than a year. That part is well established. Her motive is less certain. Traditional biographies describe opposition. Some also describe a Caribbean cruise intended to create distance between Franklin and Eleanor. The National Park Service now gives more weight to Sara's own later account. Sara said she believed they were too young. She denied trying to destroy the match. Concern and interference can produce the same action. The surviving evidence doesn't settle motive as neatly as later retellings sometimes do. The engagement survived the delay. Franklin and Eleanor married on March 17, 1905. The ceremony took place at 6 to 8 East 76th Street in Manhattan. President Theodore Roosevelt, Eleanor's uncle, gave her away. Sara remained close to the young couple. She arranged their early housing and continued to occupy a central place in Franklin's domestic life. Eleanor entered marriage at 20 with little experience managing a large household. Sara had decades of experience with servants, budgets, travel, guests, and the routines of an estate. That difference created dependence before it created open conflict. When decisions had to be made quickly, Sara already knew the people, the money, and the household system. Franklin also saw his mother's involvement as normal. He had grown up inside the same structure and did not begin marriage by rejecting it. Then came the house that would define the relationship in memory. Around Christmas time, Sara promised the couple a new home. The finished project stood at 47 and 49 East 65th Street. Architect Charles A. Platt designed two mirror image residences behind a unified exterior. Sara lived at number 47. Franklin and Eleanor lived at number 49. The street view hid the arrangement. Inside, the separation was less complete. Pocket doors allowed the rear dining and drawing rooms to open across the divide. A separate connecting door on the fourth floor let relatives pass from one unit to the other. The woodwork was dark and formal. Servants moved through back areas of the house. Family rooms sat close enough for daily movement between households. The architecture made proximity easy. It is tempting to treat the floor plan as proof of Sara's intentions. The building itself cannot tell us why every door was placed where it was. What it can show is how the arrangement worked. Two households were physically separate, but movement between them required almost no distance. That mattered in a family where Sara already held the stronger domestic position. Sara had commissioned the building and remained deeply involved in domestic decisions. Eleanor's later recollections describe how little authority she felt inside her own household. Staffing was one point of friction. Furnishings were another. Child rearing became still more personal. Sara took an active role with the grandchildren. Eleanor often found household arrangements already established before she had fully made her own decision. The couple had 6 children between 1906 and 1916. Their first son, named Franklin, died in infancy. 5 children survived into adulthood. At Springwood, Sara remained the senior household authority. At Campobello, she also maintained a cottage close to Franklin and Eleanor. The physical pattern changed by season, but the family remained near. A house can offer comfort without offering much privacy. The Roosevelt arrangement did both. Eleanor later described the effect as a lack of ownership over her own domestic life. Her memoirs remembered dependence in practical terms rather than dramatic scenes. She was inexperienced in household management. Sara was not. Servants were accustomed to Sara's authority. Franklin had spent his life within it. Most of the imbalance appeared in routine decisions. Sara's side of the story is important here. The same woman who could overrule domestic arrangements also spent years caring for people outside her immediate family. National Park Service research records a long charitable life. She served on the board of the Gallaudet Home. She gave time to the Sara Delano Children's Hospital. She joined work connected to mental hygiene and follow-up care. Former staff also remembered practical help. When employees faced illness or surgery, Sara sometimes helped with expenses. She continued relationships with people who had worked for the family years earlier. One former governess became seriously ill. Sara arranged care, doctors, nurses, drives, and a place to recover at Hyde Park. Eleanor's experience remains part of the record, but Sara's charitable life complicates a simple villain portrait. Sara's care and her management often appeared together. To people who depended on her, that could be generous. To Eleanor, the same habit could narrow the space for independent decisions. People often forget that control inside families rarely arrives wearing the name control. By the first decade of the marriage, Sara held the stronger position inside the household. She had property, money, experience, staff loyalty, and a lifetime of influence over Franklin. Eleanor had interests beyond the family. Inside the domestic structure, she had no comparable base of power. The arrangement might have continued longer if politics hadn't moved the family elsewhere. In 1913, President Woodrow Wilson appointed Franklin Assistant Secretary of the Navy. Franklin and Eleanor shifted their main life to Washington. The social rules changed. The pressure did not disappear. Washington expected the wives of senior officials to maintain a demanding calendar. Calls, cards, dinners, receptions, and formal obligations consumed hours. Eleanor disliked much of the ritual. She still performed it. In 1914, she hired Lucy Mercer as a social secretary. Lucy understood the social world Eleanor found tiring. She was young, poised, and useful in a household with a growing public schedule. The position placed Lucy near correspondence, invitations, appointments, and the endless logistics of official social life. It also placed her near Franklin. Franklin and Lucy became close. The relationship eventually crossed a line that would change the Roosevelt marriage. The exact beginning is not documented with precision. The affair is well established, but historians cannot reconstruct every private meeting or conversation that led to it. By the time Eleanor found the letters, the question was no longer whether something had happened. It was what the family would do about it. Sara's Manhattan house had been designed to keep a family near. Distance turned out not to be the real problem. September 1918. Franklin returned from a wartime trip to Europe seriously ill with pneumonia. Eleanor unpacked his luggage while he recovered. She found letters from Lucy Mercer. The discovery was private. The consequences were not. Eleanor offered Franklin a divorce. The surviving sources don't preserve every sentence spoken in those conversations. Family accounts and later biographies reconstruct the crisis from letters, memories, and people close to the marriage. What is clear is that three people now had different reasons to prevent a divorce. Sara opposed it as a family rupture. Louis Howe, Franklin's political advisor, saw a political disaster. Franklin faced the loss of both marriage and career. The reasons were not identical. Biographers describe Sara warning of family consequences and, in some accounts, financial ones. The exact form of any financial threat is less secure than the broad fact of her opposition. Sara still controlled substantial family resources and the homes around which much of Roosevelt life revolved. That gave her opposition practical weight, even when the exact words are uncertain. Howe approached the problem politically. Divorce could destroy Franklin's future in public life. For an ambitious politician in 1918, a public marital scandal could follow him for years. Franklin had already served in a major federal post and expected to remain in politics. Eleanor's position was different again. She was the injured spouse, but she was also the mother of 5 surviving children. The youngest was only 2. A divorce would not simply end a marriage. It would reorganize money, children, homes, public reputation, and the future of a family already living in public view. Franklin and Eleanor remained married. Franklin promised he would never see Lucy again. No public announcement explained what had happened. There was no clean settlement preserved for historians. The marriage continued, but the terms of the relationship changed. Eleanor did not retreat into private life after the crisis. Her wartime work shows the opposite pattern. Her work outside the household became more important. During the war, She volunteered with the Red Cross and visited naval hospitals. She worked with servicemen and relief organizations in Washington. The work placed her in rooms where Sara's domestic authority had little meaning. It also gave Eleanor practical experience. She organized, visited institutions, dealt with officials, and learned how public systems worked. Those skills would matter later. The affair didn't create Eleanor's public interests. Those interests had begun before marriage and survived its disappointments. The crisis made a separate life more necessary. The marriage itself became more complicated than a simple before and after story. Franklin and Eleanor continued to coordinate closely. They shared political goals, children, travel, and the daily demands of a public family. They also developed increasingly separate personal lives. The record supports transformation. It does not support a neat declaration that the marriage became empty. There was partnership, conflict, dependence, distance, and periods of real cooperation. Perhaps betrayal changes a household most when the household stays standing. Sara had helped preserve the marriage as an institution. She could not restore what the affair had altered within it. Eleanor could demand conditions. She could build work beyond the marriage. She could not control Franklin's future conduct. Franklin made a promise. The family moved on without resolving everything the letters had exposed. That unresolved quality matters. The Roosevelt marriage did not return to what it had been before 1918. It became a working arrangement between two people whose lives increasingly extended beyond one another. Franklin still relied on Eleanor's judgment in ways that would become clearer after his illness. Eleanor still lived inside a family system where Sara's influence remained substantial. The balance had shifted, but it had not settled. 3 years later, a different crisis made the old household struggle look small. In the summer of 1921, Franklin became seriously ill at Campobello. Weakness spread through his legs. Doctors eventually diagnosed poliomyelitis. There was no vaccine. Recovery was uncertain. Franklin was 39. He had served as Assistant Secretary of the Navy and had run for Vice President the year before. Now he could not walk without assistance. The family had to reorganize around a physical reality that would not go away. Medical treatment came first. Politics became a question rather than a plan. Franklin spent months moving between beds, treatment rooms, family homes, and attempts at rehabilitation. He worked to strengthen his upper body and recover whatever movement he could. The disability was permanent. The way he would live with it was not yet settled. A diagnosis can close one possibility without deciding every choice that follows. Franklin had been raised for public life inside a family that treated physical independence as part of gentlemanly competence. Now, ordinary movement required help from other people. Sara knew a world in which a private estate could absorb illness and protect a family member from public exposure. Eleanor and Howe knew politics would disappear if Franklin disappeared from political networks for too long. Those positions are easier to describe than the conversations themselves. The full family debate was never recorded like a meeting transcript. The traditional Roosevelt story gives this moment clear sides. In that version, Sara wanted Franklin to retire to Hyde Park. He would live quietly as a country gentleman and withdraw from active politics. Eleanor and Louis Howe pushed in the opposite direction. They believed withdrawal would end a career Franklin still wanted. Many major biographies repeat some form of this account. The Eleanor Roosevelt Papers Project also preserves the traditional interpretation. It is easy to see why the story endured. It gives the illness a domestic battlefield and the comeback a clear set of allies. The familiar version places Sara on one side and Eleanor with Howe on the other. But the record contains a complication. Sara later rejected that version. In a written rebuttal, she called the retirement story a fib. She said she had offered to keep Hyde Park open if doctors wanted Franklin to have months of quiet recovery. Her complaint was specific. She denied wanting to take him home, baby him, and make an invalid of him. The National Park Service now treats that rebuttal seriously. Its current interpretation presents Sara's position as more complicated than permanent political retirement. The disagreement cannot be removed by choosing the more dramatic version. Both traditions exist in the historical record. Sara's own rebuttal deserves weight because it is her account of her intentions. It does not erase Eleanor's experience of Sara as a controlling force in family life. The two claims can exist beside each other. A person can be controlling in one part of family life and misremembered in another. The outcome is easier to document. Eleanor became increasingly active as Franklin's political surrogate. Hal worked to keep political relationships alive. Franklin remained connected to Democratic politics during a long recovery. For Eleanor, that work meant more meetings, speeches, correspondence, and contact with party organizers. The role was partly undertaken for Franklin, but the experience belonged to Eleanor as well. She learned which political relationships mattered and which organizations could move an issue forward. She also learned that public work could provide authority no household arrangement could grant her. Hal's presence also changed the household. Sara disliked him, and biographies describe strong friction between them. His manners and political style belonged to a world far from hers. Eleanor, however, had an ally who did not answer to Sara. That altered the balance. Franklin still had to decide what kind of life he wanted. His mother could offer a place to recover. His wife and advisor could preserve a path back to public life. They could influence the choice. They could not make it. History has a habit of turning influence into authorship once the outcome is known. Franklin's return was gradual. In 1924, he appeared at the Democratic National Convention and nominated Al Smith. He used braces and assistants to reach the platform. The appearance mattered because it placed him back before a national political audience. It did not mean the recovery was complete. Franklin spent years learning how to move with braces, crutches, railings, and other people's arms. Public appearances required planning that most spectators never saw. He often locked his legs in steel braces and used another person's arm for balance. The movement could resemble walking from a distance, but it required strength and careful coordination. Politics, therefore, became physical work as well as political work. A platform, staircase, automobile, or train could become part of the planning for an appearance. Eleanor's role also changed during these years. She traveled, attended meetings, maintained contacts, and became more visible in Democratic politics. Work undertaken for Franklin expanded her own network at the same time. He also found Warm Springs, Georgia. The warm water made exercise easier. In 1926, he bought the property and developed it into a rehabilitation center. Warm Springs gave Franklin a place outside both Springwood and the New York political world. There, disability was not hidden from other patients. He spent time with people whose illnesses had stripped away the social protections wealth could usually provide. The rehabilitation center became part medical project, part community, and part second home. Sara could not run Warm Springs from Hyde Park. Eleanor did not build it for him. Franklin created that place around his own experience of disability. His political path continued. In 1928, Franklin was elected governor of New York. In 1932, he won the presidency. The sequence can look inevitable from a distance. It wasn't. There were 7 years between polio and the governorship. There were 11 between Polio and the White House. The comeback was a process. Eleanor and Howe helped keep the path open. Franklin chose to keep walking toward it, even when walking itself had become impossible without help. By the time he reached the presidency, another change had already taken place inside the family. Eleanor had built a political life of her own. Eleanor's independence did not begin at Val-Kill. It began in organizations, friendships, classrooms, and political work. During the 1920s, she became active in New York Democratic politics. Her circle included Nancy Cook, Marion Dickerman, and Caroline O'Day. These relationships were professional as well as personal. The women worked on political organizing, education, publishing, and reform. Eleanor also taught at the Todhunter School in Manhattan. She became part owner and taught history and current events. The classroom mattered because it gave her a role that did not depend on Franklin's office. Students knew her as a teacher before many Americans knew her as a political figure. On the Roosevelt estate, another project took shape. With Franklin's encouragement, Eleanor, Nancy Cook, and Marion Dickerman developed a retreat along the Val-Kill. Construction began in the mid-1920s. Stone Cottage was completed in 1926. The setting was modest by Roosevelt standards. Fieldstone came from the estate. The rooms were built for work, conversation, and time away from Springwood's formality. A separate factory building followed for Val-Kill Industries. Eleanor, Cook, Dickerman, and Caroline O'Day joined in the business venture. The project employed local workers and produced furniture, metalwork, and woven goods. The workday there sounded different from Springwood. Cabinet makers, looms, tools, and conversation filled a small experiment that was part workshop and part social circle. The idea was practical as well as cultural. Farm families could earn additional income during difficult agricultural years. The business remained small, and the Great Depression made survival harder. It never became a large commercial success. It did become a place where Eleanor's political and social circle could gather on terms different from Springwood. Val-Kill was still on Roosevelt land. Franklin supported it. This was not a simple escape from her husband or mother-in-law. It was a separate center of activity. In 1936, Val-Kill Industries closed. Eleanor then had architect Eric Googler convert the former factory into a residence for herself and Malvina Thompson. For the first time, Eleanor had a residence at Hyde Park, intended for her separate use. The house was not grand by Roosevelt standards. Its value came from how it was used. Friends, students, activists, relatives, and political visitors could gather there without entering Sara's formal household. Eleanor still moved between many places. Val-Kill did not end those obligations. It gave her one place where the center of activity was unmistakably hers. Independence now had an address. Springwood was inherited. Val-Kill was chosen. By then, Eleanor's public work had expanded far beyond Hyde Park. When Franklin became president in 1933, Eleanor began holding her own press conferences. Only women reporters were admitted. The rule had a practical effect. News organizations that wanted access to the First Lady needed women assigned to cover her. Eleanor had found a form of leverage that Sara's household authority could not provide. It did not depend on owning a room. It depended on controlling access to one. On December 31st, 1935, Eleanor began a syndicated column called My Day. She would continue writing it for decades. The column gave her a direct public voice. She wrote about travel, work, politics, people she met, and issues she wanted readers to notice. By 1938, the column appeared in more than 60 newspapers and reached more than 4 million readers. Eleanor could write from a desk and enter homes across the country without sharing a room with anyone there. Sara's influence had always worked best through closeness. Eleanor's increasingly worked through reach. People often forget that power can grow when a person stops needing to be physically present. In 1939, another test came through the Daughters of the American Revolution. The organization refused Marian Anderson the use of Constitution Hall. Anderson was one of the most celebrated black singers of her generation. Eleanor resigned from the DAR. Her resignation pushed the dispute into national attention. She and others then worked quietly behind the scenes to support an outdoor concert at the Lincoln Memorial. Eleanor did not attend the concert. She feared her presence might draw attention away from Anderson. 75,000 people came. The episode showed a kind of public influence very different from Sara's. Eleanor could now affect a national event without directing the household around her. That didn't mean Sara had disappeared. She still managed Springwood. Franklin remained devoted to her. In 1933, she published My Boy Franklin, her own account of the president's upbringing. The book kept Sara in a familiar role. She was still the mother explaining the son, even as the son now belonged to national politics. The house in New York also acquired a political life of its own. After Franklin won the presidential election in 1932, he used Roosevelt House to assemble his incoming administration. Meetings filled rooms that had once served mainly family life. Francis Perkins was offered the post of Secretary of Labor there. Harold Ickes and Henry Morgenthau were among the figures who discussed roles in the coming administration. Perkins became the first woman to serve in a United States presidential cabinet. Sara had built the house for family use. Franklin was now using it to build a government. It's strange to think that a domestic arrangement meant to preserve closeness became part of the machinery of national power. The Roosevelt household had not disappeared. Its scale had changed. In June of 1939, King George VI and Queen Elizabeth visited Hyde Park. It was the first visit of a reigning British monarch to the United States. Sara prepared Springwood for royal guests. Franklin preferred a less formal gesture. At Top Cottage, he served hot dogs. Sara was reportedly horrified. The New York Times headline said the king tried one and asked for more. The episode was light enough to become famous. It also showed Sara still occupying her place in the Roosevelt world. She was not defeated. She was still the president's mother, still at Springwood, still part of the public family image. Eleanor, meanwhile, had moved into a national sphere of work Sara did not manage. By the end of the 1930s, the old question had changed. There was no longer one household in which a single person could dominate every important decision. Sara remained powerful at Springwood. Eleanor had organizations, press access, readers, political allies in her own residence. Franklin moved between those worlds as president. The struggle had become less direct. The difference between their forms of power had become easier to see. One depended heavily on proximity. The other could travel. September 7th, 1941. Sara Delano Roosevelt died at Springwood from acute circulatory collapse. She was 86. Franklin was with her. Sara had survived James by more than 4 decades. She had lived to see her only son elected president 3 times. Her final years had not removed her from Roosevelt public life. She received guests at Springwood and appeared as the president's mother when ceremony required it. She also kept managing the estate. The domestic world that had shaped Franklin's childhood remained active around her until the end. Among the papers she left were decades of family correspondence. Letters from Franklin had been preserved across school years, politics, marriage, illness, and the presidency. The paper trail is ordinary in one sense. Families save letters. In this family, the letters also became part of the historical record of a presidency. 4 days after her death, Franklin addressed the nation by radio. Photographs from that period show him wearing a black mourning band. The speech concerned attacks in the Atlantic and a country moving closer to open war. Sara's death was not its subject. The mourning band was still visible. The country heard a president speaking about danger overseas. His family had just watched him lose the person who had known him longest. Eleanor responded differently. In my day, she wrote that Sara's strongest trait was loyalty to her family. Then she added something less ceremonial. Sara, Eleanor wrote, was not simply sweetness and light. There was also jealousy and possessiveness when her own family was concerned. The wording is unusually balanced. It gives Sara credit and names the cost in the same paragraph. There is no victory in that description. There is recognition, distance, and a judgment formed over decades. Privately, Eleanor was more direct. She wrote to a friend that it was dreadful to live so close to someone for 36 years. She said she felt no deep affection or sense of loss. Then she added one more sentence. It was hard on Franklin. Perhaps that last sentence tells us more than a harsher judgment would have. Eleanor did not pretend to mourn a closeness she had never felt. She still recognized the grief of the man between them. No one had won anything simple. Sara remained deeply loved by Franklin. Eleanor had built a life beyond Sara's authority. Franklin had continued making choices neither woman could make for him. Sara dominated much of the household. Eleanor built power beyond it. Franklin remained his own political actor. No one controlled the whole Roosevelt family. If Hitorium is your kind of history, subscribe for more stories about the private relationships that shaped public power. 3 months after Sara died, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. The United States entered the Second World War. The son Sara had spent a lifetime protecting, now led the country through most of that war. Franklin won a 4th presidential term in 1944. He died at Warm Springs on April 12, 1945. Lucy Mercer Rutherford was present. Eleanor was not. The promise from 1918 had not held. After Franklin's death, Val-Kill became Eleanor's primary home. The former factory was now the place from which she worked, received visitors, and continued public life. She was no longer First Lady. That did not end her public career. President Harry Truman appointed her to the United States delegation at the new United Nations. Eleanor entered another institution where authority depended on persuasion rather than household position. The work was slow and procedural. Committees argued over language, national interests, and the meaning of rights across different political systems. Eleanor stayed with the process. In 1948, the General Assembly adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. 48 nations voted in favor. None voted against. 8 abstained. Years earlier, Eleanor had struggled to claim authority inside a family household. Now she was working across governments. Roosevelt House still stands on East 65th Street. The 4th floor connecting door remains part of its preserved plan. Number 47 was Sara's residence. Number 49 was Franklin and Eleanor's